Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. President Biden is now asking Congress for an additional $33 billion to help Ukraine fight back against a Russian invasion. And U.S. farmers could be playing a role in helping make sure people are fed while the war rages on. As part of that funding, the White House is calling for an additional $500 million in food production assistance here at home. It says the money would be used to provide farmers with an increased number of loans and crop insurance incentives so they can grow more things such as wheat and soybeans. The request would allow for greater access to credit and lower the risk for farmers to grow those crops. The White House saying it wants farmers to grow more crops that are experiencing a global shortage due to the war.
Ukraine was one of the world's largest agricultural producers. It typically grows 10% of all the wheat that's shipped around the world. Putin has asserted sanctions are blocking food from Ukraine and Russia getting on the market, the sanctions we've imposed on Russia. Simply not true. Putin's war, not sanctions, are impacting the harvest of food and disrupting the movement of that food by land and sea to nations around the globe that need it. This funding is going to help ease rising food prices at home as well and abroad caused by Russia's war in Ukraine. It's going to help support American farmers produce more crops like wheat and oilseed, which is good for rural America, good for the American consumer, and good for the world.
Details on exactly how this assistance or incentives for U.S. farmers will work are still coming in. As part of the fight against the global food crisis, USDA announcing a drawdown of the full balance of the Bill Emerson Humanitarian Trust. Now, the trust is overseen by USDA and the U.S. Agency for International Development. As we first told you yesterday, it will be part of an effort to give $670 million in food assistance to countries in need to prevent global food insecurity. The plan is to use the trust's $282 million to get U.S. food commodities to Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Yemen, areas that have relied in the past on wheat imports from Ukraine. It will use $388 million in additional funding through the Commodity Credit Corporation to move those supplies overseas.
Vladimir Putin's unprovoked further invasion of Ukraine is compounding inflationary pressures and disrupting the stability of the global food and fertilizer markets, causing a surge in food prices that threaten to exacerbate instability around the world.
Now, USDA says an additional 40 million people could be pushed into poverty and food insecurity due to Russia's aggression. It's the first time since 2014 that the U.S. has used this emergency funding authority. And there's also concern about the impact the war could have on the protein sector and global animal feed supplies. The U.S. Meat Export Federation saying Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus combined exported about 60,000 tons of beef to China. But they say where it really matters is on the feed side. Ukraine is the number 3 corn exporter, number 2 barley exporter, and number 1 when it comes to sunflowers. Russia has been the largest wheat exporter.
There's obviously growing concern about feed availability, especially in Europe, of which Ukraine is 40% of EU imports of corn, barley, and wheat. And for example, China, Ukraine is about 23% of those same imports. So on the feed side, there's real concern about availability because not only are we worried about this crop that should be planted right now, but also the grain in storage that was still to be exported for the rest of this crop year.
And those exports aren't going out of ports right now. Boris says Ukraine is working to try and move some grain by rail into Europe.